The young and the restless spoilers' secrets of the past. Audra's struggle for freedom in Genoa. Audra had always kept her past a tightly guarded secret. She knew that revealing it would only bring complications, ones she wasn't prepared to face. Her childhood had been far from ideal, filled with struggles, pain, and a sense of imprisonment that she had worked tirelessly to escape. But now, in Genoa, she had found something she never thought possible, a new life, free from the shadows of her past. She had a loving boyfriend, a surrogate family that cared for her deeply, and a future that finally seemed promising. Yet, there was one problem. Nate. Nate Hastings was different from anyone she had ever met. He wasn't just a boyfriend, he was someone who truly wanted to understand her, someone who wouldn't settle for half-truths or silence. While she appreciated his patience and kindness, his persistent curiosity about her past was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. "Why won't you let me in, Audra?" Nate asked one evening, his deep brown eyes filled with concern. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Because some doors should stay closed, Nate. There's nothing good behind them. That's not for you to decide alone. I love you, Audra. Whatever it is, I can handle it," he assured her. But Audra knew that wasn't true. She had spent years ensuring that no one, not even the people she cared about, could ever find out where she came from. Her past wasn't just painful, it was dangerous. And now, the very thing she feared the most was about to become a reality. Her mother was coming to Genoa. A past best forgotten. Audra's childhood had been filled with cold discipline and suffocating control. She grew up in a house where love was conditional, where every move was scrutinized, and where freedom was a mere illusion. Her mother, Evelyn Charles, was a master manipulator, someone who thrived on control and saw her daughter as nothing more than an extension of herself. For years, Audra had been forced into a life she never wanted. Every choice, every decision, had been made for her. Even as a child, she had felt like a prisoner in her own home, unable to breathe, unable to live for herself. When she finally got the chance to break free, she took it without hesitation. She left without a word, cutting off all ties to her family, determined to start over somewhere new. She changed her name, disappeared from their radar, and built a new identity far away from the people who had once controlled her life. But deep down, she had always known it wouldn't last forever. She had underestimated her mother's persistence. The calm before the storm. Audra had spent months pretending that she was safe, that her past couldn't touch her anymore. But now, as she sat in her apartment with Nate, her hands shaking slightly as she stared at the message on her phone, she realized just how wrong she had been. "I know where you are. We need to talk. I'm coming to Genoa." The message was short, but it was enough to send her entire world crashing down. Nate noticed the change in her expression immediately. "What's wrong?" She hesitated for a moment before finally looking at him. "My mother, she's coming." He frowned, sensing the fear in her voice. "Is that a bad thing?" Audra let out a bitter laugh. "It's the worst thing that could happen." A battle for control. The next few days were filled with an unbearable tension. Audra tried to go about her normal routine, but the looming arrival of her mother made it impossible to focus on anything else. She knew what Evelyn was capable of. She knew her mother wouldn't stop until she had control over her life again. Nate, however, refused to let Audra face this alone. "I won't let her take you away from this life," he promised. "You don't belong to her anymore." Audra wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that she could be strong enough to stand up to Evelyn, to finally cut the last thread that tied her to the past. But the scars of her childhood ran deep, and the fear of falling back under her mother's control was suffocating. When Evelyn finally arrived in Genoa, she wasted no time in making her presence known. She showed up unannounced at Audra's workplace, as confident and imposing as ever. "You didn't think you could run forever, did you?" Evelyn said with a smirk. Audra clenched her fists. "I didn't run. I left. There's a difference." Evelyn's smile never faltered. "And now, it's time to come home." But Audra wasn't that scared little girl anymore. She had built a new life, one that had nothing to do with Evelyn's rules and expectations. And she wasn't about to let anyone take that away from her. Nate's unwavering support. Evelyn was a formidable opponent, but what she hadn't counted on was Nate. He refused to stand aside and let her manipulate Audra into submission. "You don't get to control her anymore," he told Evelyn firmly. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "And who are you to interfere?" "I'm the man who loves her. The man who will protect her from you." For the first time, Evelyn's confident expression faltered. She had never faced real opposition before. She had always assumed that she would win, that Audra would eventually bend to her will. But she hadn't accounted for someone like Nate, someone who was willing to fight for Audra when she couldn't fight for herself. And Audra saw it too. For the first time in her life, she had someone standing beside her, someone who refused to let her be swallowed by the darkness of her past. With newfound determination, she turned to Evelyn and said the words she had been too afraid to say for years. "I'm not going anywhere with you. This is my home now. My life. And you have no place in it." Evelyn's lips tightened, her eyes cold and calculating. But she saw the resolve in Audra's expression, the unshakable support in Nate's stance. She had lost. With one final glare, she turned and walked away, but Audra knew this wasn't the last time she would try to assert control. But it didn't matter. She wasn't afraid anymore. A future without fear. As they stood together, watching Evelyn disappear into the distance, Audra felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. Nate wrapped his arms around her, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "She's not going to hurt you anymore." Audra smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I know." For the first time, she truly believed it. The past no longer had power over her. And with Nate by her side, the future had never looked brighter. A silent phone call and a terrible choice. Audra's battle against her past. Audra was in the middle of her shift at Crimson Lights when her phone buzzed. The vibration was soft, almost discreet, but it was enough to send a ripple of fear through her body. She had been waiting, dreading, hoping that this day would never come. Yet here it was, a phone call that threatened to uproot her newly established peace in Genoa. Glancing around to make sure no one was watching, she carefully pulled her phone out of her pocket. The caller ID read unknown number, but she had a gut feeling she knew exactly who it was. Her heartbeat quickened and her palms began to sweat. Taking a shaky breath, she pressed the accept button and brought the phone to her ear. "Hello," she managed, her voice trembling ever so slightly. Silence. Then the voice on the other end spoke, quiet and urgent. "Audra, you need to know something. Your mother is on her way to Genoa." Those words, though brief, felt like a hammer blow to her chest. She swallowed hard and ended the call as quickly as she could, her mind reeling with memories she had tried so hard to bury. A hidden fear resurfaces. Audra could hardly concentrate on the rest of her day. All she could think about was the distinct possibility that her mother, Evelyn Charles, would show up at her doorstep any minute now, demanding her submission and loyalty all over again. Her stomach twisted at the thought. She couldn't stand the idea of facing the woman who had made her childhood an endless cycle of manipulation and fear. A part of her wanted to maintain the new life she had built in Genoa. After all, here she had found real friends, a supportive surrogate family, and most importantly, she had found Nate Hastings, a man who truly loved her. Yet, those old survival instincts flared up, screaming at her to run. She had successfully escaped her mother's control once by leaving her hometown unannounced, changing her name, and starting over. Was she prepared to do it again? Contemplating an escape late that evening, Audra paced her small living room, thoughts spiraling. The idea of running again had a seductive pull. It had worked before, so why not now? She eyed the half-packed duffel bag in her closet, a silent testament to the fact that she had never fully believed she was free. "I should just do it," she thought. "Grab my things, disappear, and move on. Maybe New Orleans this time, or somewhere further. Maybe even a different country." But a wave of guilt washed over her at the thought. Genoa was no longer just a temporary hideout, it felt like home. Could she really leave behind the people who cared for her here? Was she willing to abandon Nate without an explanation, the way she had abandoned her old life before? A friend's consolation before she could make a firm decision. The door to her apartment swung open. Nate walked in, concern etched across his face. He gently closed the door behind him and stepped closer. "I heard you got some disturbing news," he said, softly pressing his hand against her cheek. "Someone called you about your mother?" Audra bit her lip. "Yes. She's coming." Nate exhaled sharply. "I won't lie. I've been worried about this possibility for a while. I just didn't think it'd happen so soon." Tears pricked at the corners of Audra's eyes. "Nate, you don't understand what she's like. My mother is, she's relentless. She'll never stop until she has me under her thumb again." He slid his arms around her shoulders, pulling her into a comforting embrace. "Hey, you don't have to face this alone. Whatever happens, I'll be right here." She leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heartbeat. It was the first moment of peace she'd felt all day. The weight of a decision late that night, sleep proved elusive. Audra lay awake, wrestling with the dual impulses warring inside her, flight or fight, escape or confrontation. The fear of returning to her mother's clutches was almost paralyzing, yet the idea of leaving the life she'd built felt equally impossible. How can I be sure she won't break me again? She pictured the supportive faces of the people who had welcomed her into their world here in Genoa. Sharon had given her a job at Crimson Lights when she had needed one the most. Elena and Devon had become the siblings she never had, always ready to lend a listening ear. And then there was Nate, her confidant, her rock, the man who believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. If she ran, she'd be proving her mother right, that she was weak, that she needed to hide. But if she stayed, maybe, just maybe, she could break that cycle of fear once and for all. Nate's pledge of protection. The next morning, Nate found Audra sitting on the couch, staring at her phone as though it might burst into flames at any second. He handed her a cup of coffee and sat down beside her. "I know you're thinking about leaving," he said quietly. "I saw the duffel bag in the closet." She met his gaze, her eyes heavy with guilt. "I'm sorry. This is my problem, Nate. I don't want to drag you or anyone else into it." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "That's not your decision to make alone. I'm already in it, Audra. Whether you like it or not, I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." A tear slipped down her cheek. "But what if I can't stand up to her? What if she takes me back home, forces me into that life again?" "She won't," Nate said firmly. "Because we won't let her." She gave him a tentative smile. "We?" "Yes, we. All of us, Devon, Elena, Sharon, everyone who cares about you. We'll help you find a way to break free for good. You have a family here in Genoa, Audra." Evelyn's arrival in Genoa just after lunch that day, Nate and Audra were walking down Main Street when they spotted a figure stepping out of a black sedan. She was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored skirt suit, and wore a severe expression that could make anyone tremble. It was Evelyn Charles, Audra's mother. Audra froze, her hand instinctively gripping Nate's arm. He covered her hand with his own, his eyes narrowed at the sight of Evelyn. "I can't do this," Audra whispered, her breath coming in shallow spurts. "Yes, you can," Nate whispered back. "I've got you." Evelyn strode forward, her gaze fixed on her daughter. The air seemed to crackle with tension. "Audra," Evelyn said, voice clipped. "I've been looking for you." Audra squared her shoulders, trying to summon every ounce of courage she possessed. "I know. But I'm not going with you." Evelyn's lips curled into a thin smile. "Don't be ridiculous. You belong at home, with your family. I'm not here to argue." Nate took a step forward. "And we're here to make sure she doesn't have to." Confrontation and resolve. Evelyn glanced at Nate, then let out a soft scoff. Who are you to interfere in my family's business? Nate met her stare without flinching. I'm the man who loves your daughter. And I won't let you threaten her or manipulate her ever again. Audra felt a surge of gratitude and strength well up inside her. How many times had she dreamed of having someone stand by her side, refusing to let her cower in fear? Now, that dream was a reality. Evelyn's gaze darted back to Audra. You think this will last? You think you can build a life here without facing the consequences of your past? Audra lifted her chin, her voice firm. I'm not running from my past anymore. I'm simply choosing not to be defined by it. Her mother's features hardened. We'll see about that. An unexpected offer of forgiveness? The tension in the air was palpable, a standoff between two powerful wills. For a split second, something in Evelyn's expression flickered, regret, sorrow, perhaps something resembling maternal concern. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that same rigid composure. Mother, Audra continued, voice trembling slightly but resolute, I know you probably hate me for leaving. But it wasn't about you, it was about me. I needed to find out who I was without you controlling every aspect of my life. Evelyn's face remained unreadable. You walked away from your family, Audra. You turned your back on everything you knew. Because everything I knew was suffocating, Audra shot back. I deserve a chance to breathe. And I'm finally doing that here. With Nate. With friends who support me. There was a long silence. Evelyn glanced around, as if seeing Genoa for the first time, its welcoming storefronts, the friendly locals passing by, and most importantly, the unwavering solidarity surrounding Audra. Is there no place for me in your new life? Evelyn asked, her tone surprisingly subdued. Audra hesitated, taken aback by the question. She had never once considered that her mother might seek reconciliation. The woman she remembered was cold, manipulative, and utterly unyielding. Now, though, there was a crack in that iron exterior. I don't know, Audra said honestly. I'm still healing. If you're here because you want to control me again, I won't allow it. But if you genuinely want a chance to have a relationship with me, a real relationship, then maybe we can talk. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, as though assessing whether Audra's words were sincere. Then, with a small nod, she turned and walked away, leaving mother and daughter's fate hanging in the balance. Rebuilding or letting go, Nate immediately wrapped Audra in a reassuring hug, his steady warmth grounding her in the aftermath of that tense confrontation. She closed her eyes, breathing him in, letting the adrenaline and fear subside. Are you okay? He asked gently. Audra exhaled, managing a small nod. I will be. I don't know what happens next, but I'm not running anymore. She looked up at him with gratitude and relief shining in her eyes. Thank you for standing by me. I couldn't have done this without you. He shook his head. You're stronger than you realize, Audra. You could have, but I'm glad I was here to help. A glimmer of hope. Indiana. The following days, there was no immediate sign of Evelyn. Audra found herself torn between dreading her mother's inevitable reappearance and feeling an odd sense of relief that she might finally have some control over her own fate. Perhaps Evelyn would return to her old ways of coercion, or perhaps she might truly want to bridge the gap between them. Until she knew for certain, Audra resolved to continue living her life, working at Crimson Lights, spending time with her friends, and deepening her bond with Nate. She had come too far to let a ghost from her past destroy everything she had built. Standing tall one evening, as she sat with Nate on the sofa in her apartment, Audra felt a sense of peace settle over her. Yes, her future was uncertain. Yes, her mother's intentions were still unclear. But for the first time, she wasn't being propelled by fear. She was making choices for herself, and she was determined to protect her newfound happiness. Do you think she'll come back? Audra murmured, resting her head against Nate's shoulder. He ran his fingers gently through her hair. She might. But you're not alone this time. And no matter what happens, I promise I'll protect you the best I can. She smiled softly. I know. Thank you. As she drifted off to sleep, Audra allowed herself a rare moment of optimism. Perhaps her mother could change. Perhaps forgiveness was possible. Or perhaps it wasn't, and she would have to stand her ground once again. Either way, she was done running.